computer. Lovely.
Hi, guys. Thank you for joining us.
I'm not gonna confuse it. All righty. Mark, come on, we're waiting.
How would you like if people come to your user group and start?
Yeah, really.
Who wants to show up? Oh, yeah.
And that was Mark.
Everybody for coming to have a second in the series of Salesforce DX. Last time we met was a little bit ago. We talked about one source of DX. We kind of did a whole really high overview of what DX is and what we could and couldn't do with it. And at the end of the session, we asked you guys, and everybody was here to vote on what you think the next topic should be. So today we are taking the next topic that everybody voted for. How do you transition to DX or something else? Right? So in the main transition to DX, there's something inherent assumption that you already have development that isn't related to DX, and you need to somehow move from what you're doing right now to DX. That is a little different than if you're starting in a brand new work, or you have more prepared development, and you want to start using DX on that. So more of what we focus today is still that you have a good amount of custom development that you're looking to figure out how do I take this step to move from what we call episode to Salesforce DX. And so, so first of all, I think nobody in this room is new, right? What's your name? Mike. What is your name?
Do you have a last name?
Yeah.
All right, good.
But it's usually nobody. Mike.
Yeah.
I guess my title is solution architect. I do full stack developer on Salesforce.
How much is that?
Not 7 years.
Oh, really?
So I started out Salesforce 7 years ago working on the workbooks. If you remember those other things when they came out, there was one about and I have the chat that I did, and that's how it learned. And I thought the first 3 of us, 5 of us at the end, that was a supply chain management system, all the
Wow.
and then financial correspondent, having partner.
So the SCI package is yours?
Yes.
So do let's get about it because
I know you.
You know me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I used to work at Financial Force.
Yes.
Yes.
Diane and
Yes, yes.
okay.
All right, we're going to catch up later. Yes, we're going to catch up later.
But we'll get it.
I'm not cheap, some of that.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Everything's going to be recorded, absolutely. Probably, what do you want to...
Welcome back to everybody else's video. I think you know who we are. Let's just go to the next slide.
This is who we are.
I'm Ohad. What's going on?
I'm doing it.
So John is going to talk mostly today, so that's why I'm doing this part. So once you actually talk about the knowledge, this is a lot more in John's wheelhouse. But this is kind of, can you go back? Yeah.
Go back?
No, just, yeah, let it all show up.
All right, let it all show up.
So we'll talk today about, or John will talk today about how to first video and we say talking about transitioning to DX. Why do you need to plan it? Why do you do it? And kind of look at a basic transition plan. I think it's just easier if John is going to go through all this instead of me explaining what each thing
You're doing great.
But John has been working with DX and has been doing a lot of cool stuff with it and kind of on the forefront. So I think all of us are pretty lucky to have you presenting this topic here today. So good luck, John.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
If I oversold, then everybody gets to throw some pizza at you later.
It's all good. It's all good. So, alrighty. Let's talk about, you know, you gonna drive slides?
Sure.
All right, you drive the slides because then I can talk and then okay. All right. So when you talk about DX, there is a lot in the community about what is DX, what's going on with DX, what does it mean to be in DX, what does it mean to implement it. The end goal is, in my book, the end goal can be something very simple, or it can be the medium or the way that you transform your development process. And you've got to think about it in those perspectives. You've got to understand why it is that you're going to DX and what is specifically you're going to get out of your outcome. So when you talk about, you know, understand what are you trying to actually achieve, what are you trying to do? I mean, if your entire goal is to take your Happy Soup org, and everybody knows what Happy Soup org is, okay? If your entire goal is just to take a Happy Soup org and then put it into a DX package and then you call it quits for the day, all right, well, that is possible. But what value add is that? I mean, we've been working with packages, we've been working with a lot of different things in the world of development, but also in the world of Salesforce. And there's a lot more to what DX really is. And so when you talk about it, you know, is it truly just, you know, like I was saying, a source control only type task? Do you want to integrate with source control better? Or do you want to like a well-oiled development process that allows every part of your development, developers in all of your development process to work much easier, much simpler? I mean, what are you really striving for? Something very simple or something very large that'll just be the fundamental, I don't want to say the framework and the platform for your entire business operations. So when you think about it, you've got to understand what is your real goal from there. So when you talk about Salesforce DX, it is not simply about, you know, a Salesforce CX CLI, which is the command line interface. It's not about the real cool replacement for Eclipse IDE, which is VS Code, and the next one. And you know, there's a lot more to it. And one of the biggest bangs to the buck, as it were, when you're using DX, is to integrate and create packages. Now, you've been working with managed packages, first generation managed packages, and we know what the value is by doing that kind of work and taking all that code and putting it into a distinct artifact. So we're talking about, when we talk about packages, some of the value added about using packages, of course, are simple things like versioned artifacts. I want to deploy version 1.7 of my app into this environment. And before, in the world of Salesforce, we would have to deploy piece, Apex class, you know, new field, new permission set, whatever. But we never really knew, is this environment exactly the way this environment is? Did I get everything deployed over here that I should have been deploying over here? And so with version artifacts, we remove that kind of confusion. We remove that kind of nebulous understanding of what's going on. And then we can just say, well, I know this version here, it is exactly what it has, features A, B, and C, but it does not have features D and E. And I know that because when I build a package from source control, it is easier to audit. I can trace my package development. I can trace all the features that I did, and I can map them back to whatever ticketing system that I have. But I can also see through source control that these components at this point in time make up these features, A, B, and C. And I know that I packaged and I created my package from this point in time in version control. We've never had that option really in Salesforce. We've done crude imitations of it, but we haven't really come to the point where we had source control was the source of truth. And so when you look at your end goal about what it is when you're trying to adopt DX, there's a lot of different things to think about and to consider. And ultimately, for me, it's make my life easier. But at the end of the day, as I said in the bottom, achieving all of this is going to take a little bit of time, a little bit of effort. And so that's what you also got to be thinking about when you're about to go down this path of DX. Next slide, please.
I think the amount of effort and time that it will take is in direct proportion to how much you already have in your platform, right? How much
Oh,
you
yes.
already have in your org?
And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You know, we'll talk about a little bit later that if you've got a brand new spanking org, your transition to DX is going to be a non-event for the most part. If you have a product that's been around for 10 years, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So, you know, the first thing about why do you need to plan to transition? Because again, this is going to be a big deal. This is going to be a lot of work, considering what you, especially if you have a well-established org. And obviously, let's just talk about the obvious thing. This won't happen by itself. You've got to make sure that you plan, get organized, get everything figured out about who's going to do what. You need to take the time to experiment. Let's go through all those. You've got to experiment about what, you know, what is the Salesforce DX way of doing things? You know, what does it mean to work with the CLI? What does it mean, the new source formatting, which is incredibly, a whole lot better than what it was. You've got to learn about unlock packages and packaging in general. How does it work? You've got to learn about how source control works in the world of Salesforce. These are things, these are new things that, you know, Mark, you've been around for a while in the declarative side, and a lot of this wasn't around, and a lot of this wasn't needed. But now we're getting into a new day. And so, you know, these are the things you've got to experiment with. You've got to learn to play and work with this and understand what this is all about. Next one, please. You got to learn about decoupling. So we're going to come back to that, I promise you. And then not only do you learn, but you're going to have to practice. So, you know, plan in your transition plan, in your project plan to go to DX, you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to play with a bunch of packages. You're going to have to learn what really does work. You know, it's one thing to read the blogs and go through the trailhead, but until you really just get in there and tinker with it and practice with it and say, oh God, this really does not work at all this way. Let me do it this way. Then you'll start to figure out how these things come together. Next one, please. So again, there are a lot of things to consider. Let's, you know, two of the biggest things is about how are you going to bring your package together? If you have a large, complex org, sure, you could pick it up and move it into a single package. What value add is that? Because do you want, you know, a large, complex org that's dealing with lots of different concerns? Do you want to have to regression test your support application every time your sales application changes because it's a new deployment? Do you want to break it up a little bit? Have the support application separate from the sales app? Have an integration to some MDM service that you have. If that changes, you want to just make sure that that one piece changes and not everything else. You don't need to. Right now, the problem with everything being in the happy soup is we've got to test literally everything, and we don't. Let's just be honest. We don't test everything, but theoretically, all of that is connected and tied together. And so having things in packages, discrete units, makes it a whole lot easier to manage the change. You're also talking about, you know, the change management and migration. You know, you're talking about how do you bring a package into an org that has code already existing? What do you have to do to make sure that that code that exists there gets scooped up by one or more of the packages? And so you've got to look at all these different types of aspects of it. It's going to take time to do this. Again, we were talking about, you know, if you have a well-established org, you probably have a twisted mess. And when I say twisted mess, I'm talking about a lot of circular dependencies. Think about it. The Visual Force page has a dependency on at least one or more Apex classes. They have dependencies on other Apex classes, which have dependencies on Salesforce S objects. And S objects have different fields, and those fields have, and there's also action items that allow, you know, what's the view link, what's the edit link, and that might go to a different page altogether. So all of a sudden, this one Visual Force page now has a dependency on a different Visual Force page. And you don't think about that when just looking at it objectively. People normally start thinking about dependencies and circular dependencies, but they only look at it just at the apex level. But in the world of Salesforce, you can get into a lot more dependency questions and a lot more twisted circular dependencies from all different facets of it. You know, it took time to get that twisted mess. It's going to take time to untangle it. It's going to take resources. You know, one of the biggest things I've seen with a lot of different, not only the teams that I've led through it, but also teams I've observed and helped counsel, it's been a major question. Were these teams did these teams have nothing to do already? And the answer almost always is not, is, you know, they were fully maxed out. They were already allocated 100%. And what we're talking about is a project, especially on an existing org. We're talking about a major project. So even the question about how do you plan, does your team have the available cycles to actually go and undertake this effort? And most of the time it's not. So you're going to have to think about, well, you're going to need to staff up. And that means you're going to get some extra help, maybe temporarily, bring some contractors and consultants, whatever manpower you need to get over the hump. But remember, if you're doing all you can do just to stay up with the wave that you got, there's no way you're going to get ahead of it and add that extra cycle in. It's obviously going to take money. You know, Chris, you're the only Salesforce guy in the room, so you know, Salesforce will tell you, no, it's free. You can transition to DX. Yeah, right. Yeah, the lighting migration helper. Yeah, right. But you know, plan on it. It's, I mean, any kind of sizable implementation project on DX is going to do it. And so, basically, my advice: go sweet talk somebody with a budget, and make them your best friend. Because without the budget, without the resources, it's not going to happen. It just won't.
So I think the gist of the last two slides, basically, like everything in life, right? If you don't really plan, you'll never really get where you need to go because you're just kind of winging it. And with something as complex as code base and metadata, you know, the planning becomes really, really crucial. And people don't think about it. Like, I've been talking to people about DX, and they're like, yeah, we're starting to now break things into packages. Oh, really? How many packages are you going to do? Oh, we'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, how are you going to create dependency or avoid dependency between your packages? Oh, we're not going to have any dependency issues. Like, okay, I guess I'll hear from you in about 6 months, and we'll see what happens then, right? But planning really, I mean, it's a really imperative part of the whole effort.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, we've talked about that now. When you look at a basic transition plan, it's got a couple of different components. First of all, you know, what is it, the old adage, when you begin a journey, you have to start somewhere. You have to know where you're starting from. I don't know. All right, that's my
Journey of 1,000 miles.
Yeah, why don't you do this? I mean, really. What he said, yes, exactly. All right, what that means here is you have to understand and organize your code base. You have to understand what is currently in your org. Obviously, if you have a new org, you don't have to worry about that. But if you do have stuff and you've invested lots of time over it, it's going to take time to map that and understand that. If you're like any client that I've ever seen, and I mean any client I've ever seen, at any place that I've ever worked, and the man right here is about to agree with me, the people that invented it are not there anymore. The tribal knowledge has dissipated quite a bit. So if you pick up something and you move it, how do you know that you're doing it safely? You've got to understand it. And that means inventory your code. Know every bit about it. Understand all the logical groupings of the code. What I mean by logical groupings is, you know, if you have the Visualforce page and you have an Apex class backing up and you have a couple of other Apex classes backing that up and a couple of S objects, understand that kind of a grouping and organization of the code is
it's actually not just code, it's really all of your metadata.
I was about to come on that. There you go. No, you're fine. So, yeah, thank you. The next step is take a stab and see what you think your package map will be. Because what's the Wayne Gretzky, hockey guy? He has a great analogy. He says, always skate to where the puck is going to be. And what that means, well, what that means to me in this case is know where you're going to go. Look and see where you're heading. We know where we are. We got to know where we want to go to. This will change. That's why I said first draft of the package topography map. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. But it will change. It'll be a living document, but it'll at least give you a guide about where you want to go. Refactor is needed. Again, on the previous slide, we talked about it. Most everybody's got a twisted mess as far as the existing code base. That twisted mess will not break out easily. Now, there have been some techniques we've developed to help break this out and organize it so that things can live independently in various packages. But it's going to be some refactoring effort. If it's not, then most likely what you're doing is taking your happy soup and put it into a single package. That's the only time I don't see anybody who needs a refactor, which is fine. If that's all you need, then that's all you need. Now the refactoring can go in parallel. And I talked about it earlier. I said, what is DX? Is DX just moving things into a package? No, I'm talking about now refactoring your code, making it more organized, making it better, fixing the problems that you had to begin with as far as tangling the mess and breaking it out a little bit. That's got nothing to do necessarily with DX. You should probably be doing that anyway. But doing so and undergoing the refactoring effort will make it easier to transition to DX and unlock packages especially. The transition plan, of course, is you're going to create your first package. And we'll talk about a little bit of that. You're going to deploy that first package. Both of those events will take some time. And you will learn a lot of things that you did not think. They are deceptively simple as far as create your first package and deploy your first package. Permjit knows the first time we deployed a couple of packages last year, we learned a lot really quick. And we had to make some adjustments very quick. But yeah, and then once you get that sort of in that, then you're going to rinse and repeat. Because you're not done with the first package, or you're not done after your first package is probably what I want to say there. All right, so again, know where you're starting from, understand what you currently have, and that means not just Apex, but all of the metadata. You've got to know how these things come together. Next one, please. You've got to understand how it all connects. We've talked about it. We've talked about, and it's not just code dependency to code dependent, circular dependencies, not Apex to Apex, but it's Apex to S object to action overrides to permission sets and profiles and who is influencing those. All of the org, you got to understand it all. The advice that I give everybody, and what worked for me considerably when I did this on the code basis, is to start recording everything that you have. And it's a spreadsheet will work fine if you want to invent a lovely database to make it happen. God love you, because you've got a lot of time on your hands. But the basic information you got to understand is, what is the API name, the label, what is the metadata type? And, what prospective package are we talking about? Who owns this? If it's got multiple teams in your organization, you've got to know who is actually driving the changes to these particular elements. Is it the PSA team? Is it the SCM team? Is it the HCM team? All these different teams. Who on those teams know about this particular feature versus that feature? I've got the same issue at Rootstock now. We've got teams all around the world. They're responsible for key sections of the Rootstock app. And we've got to understand exactly how that plays together. And there's going to be crossover. Things are going to be owned by multiple teams. And you've got to understand those relationships in your organization to understand the code. What you're going to see is that this spreadsheet will take on a life of its own. It will not be a single event, but it'll be a living document. You'll use it for the entire transition of your code base into DX. You'll be tracking whether or not something becomes obsolete, whether or not something should be refactored, and even simple. I think the last one has it been packaged? Yep, there it is. So you'll need this type of document just to keep sanity about what is still left to be done. Using the spreadsheet, you can filter on what has already been packaged and what's obsolete. You can focus on helps you crystallize and see the big vision. All too often, when I talk about transitioning to DX, people get this idea of, oh yeah, it's how do we eat the elephant? And then lately I've been hearing, how do we eat all of the elephants? Well, yes, that is true. We've got a lot of elephants to eat, but we still got to focus on one elephant at a time and only one bite at a time of the elephant. And we got to know that. So, yes.
John, when we talk about refactoring, do you want to touch about what do you mean when you say, why do we need to refactor our code?
Why do we need to refactor? So, again.
Don't answer me.
Okay.
Asking,
I know.
Everybody in the room understands why are we talking about refactoring? Why do we need to consider refactoring code as part of my transition to DX? Is that something that everybody in the room understands, or should I have John?
Raise your hand if you want me to explain it. All right, so we've got a couple of them. If you don't refactor, then you're left with the code in the state that it currently is. Most likely, that code was built in where the org was the source of truth. There were no lines to demarcate one package from another, one section of the code from another, one module from another. The code was developed as one mass. It is the proverbial happy soup. If your goal is to do something more than just have a Herculean monster-sized super package, you've got to figure a way to break it apart. I have seen many failed attempts where somebody is literally taking one piece of code out, another piece of code out, another piece of code out, another piece of code out, and he keeps pulling pieces out because he discovers more dependencies. And if you've ever done a change set deployment and you realize, oh, wait a minute, I didn't finish I didn't get everything in on the change set deployment. It's the same type of thing. They're trying to pull more and more and more and more out until either they have a blob and they say, well, it's in a package, therefore I'm done. Okay, sure, yeah, you put it into a package, but God help you the next time you actually have to change a piece of code. Because going to DX is not just the end, going to packages is not the end goal. Going to packages in DX is to set you up so that you can operate effectively and efficiently and expediently in the future. And so it's not just the end goal of doing it. And so you're going to need to refactor a lot of times. So refactor so that you can break apart these dependencies, or at least organize these dependencies in such a way that they can coexist in separate packages. Do you have a package that contains an S object, a data object, and then does another package add a field on that S object? So when this package B is deployed into the org, it adds a new field to that object. Well, how do you incorporate that new field into your queries that you might have lying around in your Apex classes? How do you do things like, how do you add permissions to your new field that you've added from one package to another? So that this is a deeper subject, and as far as refactoring, we'll get into techniques and frameworks on a subsequent talk. But that's the kind of thing that's going to happen, because otherwise, without refactoring, I don't see how you're going to be able to have a manageable package that is ready to expand, ready to grow with your organization.
And again, I mean, it's all about how complex is your org, right? I mean, if you have a really simple org, a lot of what we're talking about right now is kind of almost a moot point, right? But the more complex your org is, the more you use things like enterprise patterns, the more you need to make sure that your enterprise patterns support this kind of dependency injection and be able to manage your dependencies across objects, right? So if you have simple example, if you have a selector for an S object, right? One class that is supposed to aggregate all of the queries that you have against an S object. But now, as John said, you have a secondary package that introduces new fields, new Apex classes, or whatever it is that is
new package-specific methods and something.
How do you deal with code that lives in two separate packages related to the same S object without creating a messy mess and unreadable and uninterpretable code?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because a lot of people we look at other languages, outside of Salesforce. This is nothing new under the sun. You know, Java.NET, any of these guys, they have been doing this for decades. And these techniques about dependency injection make sense, and they apply here to Salesforce just like they would any other place. It's just a question of getting it done. Yes?
It's fair to say that if you have more than one product, you would probably need to refactor. Otherwise, you're just moving your happy soup into DX.
Yeah, it's very fair. So if you could.
You may not need to.
Exactly. So it all depends on the code base, the size of the code base. You know, and we're going to talk about strategies in the next slide. But if it boils down to you only have one app or one section of code, then sure, one package makes sense. Don't break it down further. Don't break it into micro packages when there's no need to do so. That type of thing. That's a very good question. There you go, please. And of course, track the progress of what's getting refactored and what's getting put in packages. So you're basically going back to that spreadsheet that I was talking about. So that's, all right, so let's talk about how do we identify potential packages. And so to your comment, if you're identified that they only have one package or one app and that's all you really need, it's a small app, okay, fine. You might be looking at one package. All these little semi-squares or rectangles on the right represent package potential modules. So when you're looking at your org, you've got to identify where you might probably have packages come out. And one easy place to look is what are the existing applications that you have in the org? If you're in the classic mode, it's the upper right-hand corner drop list, all those different applications. If you're in Lightning Experience now, it's the tic-tac-toe box on the left. And all those applications pop up. Those are did giveaways as far as these are probably packages that we're going to have to put in. But you're also going to look at packages in a couple of different ways as well. Let's go to the next one. So you might have custom integrations to other places in the enterprise, MDM connections. You might have SMS, you might have PeopleSoft, you might have a host of other different connections off the platform. More often than not, they have custom code associated with it, or some sort of custom logic associated with it. That is another place to isolate. You'll find that when you're refactoring your code, you'll find, especially in large enterprises, there are common things, common services that a lot of the different apps need. For example, a central account management. What I mean here is simply just the information about how do you create an account, manage account, what is the required field. All of that is needed probably by multiple apps in your org. So centralized services probably is another candidate for packaging. What are you about your app exchange customization? So you've got things like Salesforce Field Service Lightning, FSL, the Financial Forces PSA product, and the Rootstock ERP product. These are third-party vendors that give you managed packages from the app exchange, but you will probably make customizations on top of those, bundle those customizations into a package, a module. And then we'll talk about, core libraries and frameworks. So we're not going to dive too much into those, but those are also isolated, very easy to manage and discrete units of things that should be bundled. And the last one, please. Is the common, what I've called the common S-objects package. And basically it represents the shared services, the very most common artifacts of Salesforce that everything is depending on. So for example, the account object. Every single system probably wants their hand a piece of the account object. Every single system, or a bunch of them, probably want something out of the case object, the user. So these are the common S objects that all the other services, and they probably fall a little bit under the centralized services object, but the common object becomes a very simple way to describe it. So these are different ways to look at your org and say, these are potentially where I'm going to get modules, potentially where I'm going to have packages. Next slide, please. Yes, he's got a little girl who needs him very badly right now, so she's not happy. Hope she feels better, man. Yes. All right. When you go through the exercise and you figure all these different packages are out there, then you have to throw them up on a whiteboard to say, what does the topography look like? What does the landscape, how do these connect? And so I took all these and just randomly threw them up because, next point, it shows what packages potentially depend on others. So for example, the support package probably has some dependency on the central account management package. Next one, please. And sales might have it on central account management, but maybe it also has a dependency on the common. This is at this point, you're guessing what it will be, but that's okay because you can figure it out later. But then you'll start seeing other connections from central account management and common onto various things like frameworks and whatnot. And then that'll give you an idea of the topography, the vertical nature of your dependency graph, which is important because the next thing you need to start focusing on are the packages that don't depend or are at the bottom of your dependency stack. And then you work your way up. You work your way up to the next group that depend on that first wave. And then you go to the other next group. And eventually you work your way all the way up to the top of the dependency graph. Think about it as like building a 10-story building. You don't start at the 7th floor. And this is the exact same. You start from the ground floor up and work your way up each time. That's the strategy. I have seen people try to carve out a section, maybe the 9th floor, and it depends on, the lower 8 floors, but that still hasn't been crystallized into a package. It's all in a happy soup, and you can't work out the dependency management very easily, and it gets very ugly, very twisted, and there's some interesting attempts at how to make that work. The safest advice, build it from the ground floor up. Next point, and the reason is ultimately it just reduces the number of variables and complexity that you have to deal with. Once you're sure that these packages down here are stable, if you have problems getting this one codified, most likely it's not because of this. And once you get this stable and you're trying to codify this one and get this one deployed, if there's a problem, most likely it's not one of these two guys. That's the idea. So ultimately, I've termed it as you want to drain the happy soup from the bottom. If this represents the entire happy soup, you want to start working from the bottom layer and just start draining that soup out from the bottom. So that's what I mean. So you can feel free to use that term. I didn't copyright it, but anyway, life goes on. Does that make sense? For the question? Hit the left arrow. There you go.
Can you help the journey? So if we start from the bottom and we have just the first layer done in DX, and let's take the example of sales, that is probably at that time not in DX. If we are doing any sort of functionality development in sales, then can you help me understand the journey that at that time, does every deployment mean two deployments, one in DX and one in
So the question probably is, does the sales feature development need to stop while I fix the bottom pieces? Is that another way of thinking about it?
Sure. And then another one is you, while we are constructing, what am I doing with sales? Or am I, because the answer would be no, right? I cannot stop my business.
Exactly.
Until I'm done, right? So help me understand, what does that look like? What does the feature development on sales look like while I'm building from it?
So the journey, what's happening from this month to 2 months from now, is you've got one team working on obviously the packages of the framework. But we've already talked about the fact that there's going to be a refactoring effort. So not only is there a X graph component, there's a Y graph component to this journey as well. What I mean is you're moving things into packages, but you're also refactoring your code. Some of it is in the happy soup that you're refactoring. Again, the refactoring is to help break apart the dependencies into clean separation, isolated separation, so that when you do get them into a packaging state, they're much easier to work with. But there is still going to be development. There's going to be development on the sales. And so that sales team has to factor in two thoughts. They have to factor in the new features, but at the same time, they have to start thinking about refactoring the code. Even if it's not necessarily packaged yet, they still have to get it organized so that eventually when the packaging arrives, it's ready to go in. And so this has implications across the board. Most notably is the one I was talking about earlier. It takes extra resources because it wasn't like the feature development team didn't have, or it wasn't like the feature development team had cycles to work with to begin with. And so that's an aspect that you have to worry about. You're going to throw more resources at it. And also it's a question of timing. Do you throw a lot of resources at it to overcome the inertia quickly, or do you so there's a factor that if you throw 1 or 2 resources at this problem as far as refactoring, they themselves won't have enough productivity to get things done and keep up with feature development at the same time. This is very much because your feature development teams are still moving at full steam, so you're going to need to match that speed and actually overcome it some in order to get ahead and keep up with all the changes that are in process. So there is new feature development, and it has to be, once you understand how the patterns start to come together and how the real code should come together, your feature development teams will start to build new things in those new patterns. They will plan in their sprint cycles to refactor some of the, and untangle some things. So by the time when the common and the central account management and all the framework packages are done, and the engineering team says, let's focus on the sales package, sales team has their house in order. And you only need the extra resources for time, Because once you have everything refactored and you're waiting to go into package land, well, you're just doing new feature development. But I mean, once you've got the patterns down, you don't need the extra help to get you over the hump. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
As we move something that's currently in the happy soup, let's take something that's a common object, common API, or whatever, used by lots of different products. Use that common library to move it out of the happy soup and into the common library. Are you thinking that we would need to have deployments in parallel of the happy soup and the new DX common libraries that work together in production?
Well, eventually, the more packages that go into production, they will assume control over existing code that exists in production. So while you might have been doing some refactoring work here to get into enterprise patterns, among other things, as those packages are deployed, they will assume control of that code, and the development will not be done in the happy soup manner. It'll be done in a DX source format manner. And so, or DX packaging manner is basically what it will. And then eventually, as you get more packages out there, they'll assume more control of it, and then you'll be in more of a DX style type development. Another question? Okay, I'm just stretching because I'm being bored. Got it, no problem. Any other questions before we leave this page? All righty, next one, please. Other things to consider, because I haven't given you enough. Governance, all right? Most likely, if you're taking this implementation and you have a very complex existing, or you have more than just yourself doing this. When I did the first DX adoption over at the law firm years ago, there were two guys. You know one of them, actually, John Story. And there were two other guys, and it was just the three of us, and we had no oversight. It was awesome. And there were no other teams, and we just talked every day. And the governance was simply, we were all on the same page. But as you have more teams and they scale, you have to get more formal about your procedures and about how things are going to be moved and who has ownership of which packages, and are you making the changes here or there, and who's making those changes, and how do you communicate this out? All of those questions have to be figured out. For the lack of a better word, it's governance. Source code branching strategies. DX packaging is beautiful when you go into full branching mode with source control. That might be new, especially if you're declarative engineers, because you're like, I don't use source control now. Yes, I understand. There's a trailhead for that. But even if you do use source control, it's important to start. Yeah, I'm not looking over there, not at all. We love our esteemed colleague of the admin group. We love for you, darling. But yes, it's good, because then you can start thinking about, well, I'm doing feature development on one branch and another branch, and I've got a third feature that's being developed, and oh, I've got the main release train on a master branch, and I can keep all of this separate. You know. But yeah, enough said about that. These are things to think about. I talked about in governance, but you know, you're documenting your procedures. You got to tell it, make sure that everybody's on the same page. This is a new way of doing things. This is a new way for your organization to be doing things. So got it figured out, understand it. And that's going to, of course, it's going to be a living document. It's going to evolve over time. So next one. And yes, we've been talking about it, but this, I'm going to drive this point home. Most established orgs are not set up at all to break apart. Even some applications are not set up at all to be broken apart. And so it's going to be a lot of fun. Next one, please. Yeah, a new org or a new implementation, a new project, that's going to be simple because it's greenfield. And your biggest nightmare will be untangling circular dependencies, especially the more packages that you see. All right, next one. And yeah, so a couple of tips, things to think about. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. In the managed package world, first generation, you are deathly afraid of releasing. You're deathly afraid of making a change. For example, once you deploy in a first generation managed package world, for all the ISVs out there, once you deploy a piece of Apex code with a global declarative modifier, you can never remove that for all eternity. Because Salesforce has to be backward compatible and means all these backward compatibility rules. But don't be afraid to make mistakes. One of my clients, we pushed out a bunch of changes and then realized we had pushed too many things into one package and we wanted to break it out into smaller packages. There is a way to do that. There is a way to get that done. And it's a very simple way in the world of second generation packaging. It's much easier. It's much more forgiving world. You don't worry about making mistakes. You can fix them. Next, please. Play with this. Experiment. Next one, please. It's going to take a lot of time. All right. There's some people in here where, that have to answer to CIOs and CTOs, and I don't want to tell them it's going to take forever, but it's going to take X amount of time. And there's no getting around that. But that's okay, because the journey, you're going to learn a lot out of it in the process, and it's going to be a much more robust scenarios once you're done. But you're going to get it. And since it's going to take a while, always remember why you're doing this. What are the goals? Take the time up front to clearly articulate what the benefits will be, because in 2 months, somebody's going to be questioning, why in the world are you spending all this money? Why do we have all these contractors lying around here? What are all these extra people doing? You've got to be able to answer that. You've got to be able to continue selling, for lack of a better word, selling the story and the benefits to buy you the time to get it done correctly. So again, these are just thoughts. Next one. We're going to post these slides and make sure that everybody gets them. But in the meantime, here we go. There is a new book coming out December 5th called Mastering Salesforce DevOps. If you know me, you know that, of course, I'm all about Apex programming. I'm all about the engineering side. I'm about programming side of Salesforce. I don't know what declarative is all about at all. I'm not looking that direction. And there's 2 books that I really, 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 really love. One is Advanced Apex Programming by Dan Appleman. It is absolutely a beautiful piece of work as far as programming. Another one is Force.com Enterprise Architecture by Andy Fawcett. It's actually going to be re-released as Lightning Platform Enterprise Architecture very soon, but that's a whole different story. I now have a 3rd book that I'm absolutely in love with. All right, anybody here familiar with the DevOps book called Accelerate? This book right here is Accelerate in the world of Salesforce. Just like Andy Fawcett's book was Martin Fowler's Patterns of Enterprise Architecture, an absolute icon in the world of technology and engineering to Salesforce, this book is going to be the same thing for the book Accelerate. It's done by Andrew Davis, who is from, I believe, San Diego, and he worked for Apereo for a long time, and then he works for Capado now. He was instrumental in Apereo's adoption and productization of DX. They have the Apereo DX tool now and stuff like that. But this really is 450 pages of the deepest stuff, and I was devouring it when I was reading it. So it's going to be released December 5th. You can look on Amazon now and get it up. Next one, please. Architecting unlocked packages in your Salesforce org. So please forgive me, but for the next 30 seconds, it's all about self-promotion. This is the talk that I gave at Trailhead DX about 1.5 years ago. That talk was all about the journey that we had gone through at the law firm and how we started to think about breaking up the orgs, how we started thinking about packaging things. It's a lot of rehashing of what we talked about tonight, but it's still a good resource for you and your teams to start getting on the same page and think about it. And the next one, forgive me, we'll throw up here. Lots of blogs have been posted about DX on Salesforce. Again, we'll send this out so you'll have all these links. But these are 5 things about getting started with DX that came out just about 1.5 years ago. And then the next page, please. And the next page is all about unlocked packages. And again, they came out just about 1 year ago. So again, I highly recommend you getting into these if this is your start of your DX journey. Next page. Any questions? Yes, sir.
John, when you look at the law firm that's
Mm-hmm.
going through and did this work, what was their ROI?
For starters, we knew we could articulate. I could look at somebody and say, yes, this is truly what is deployed into that environment. This feature has made it into this environment, but not that environment. I could actually understand where I was with everything. It was easier to onboard new people. I could hand them the source code for one package and say, go learn this chunk, versus all of the happy soup, all the congested, all the inner complexities of it all. Again, the auditability and the traceability was one of the biggest factors of it all. Our deployments went down considerably. We used to do Wednesday night deployments. They used to take several hours of change set hell. I would say routinely, I would tell my wife to go to sleep and I'll catch you in the morning. A couple of nights I saw the sunrise, stupid things like that. A lot of that went away. It was still a little bit here and there, but a lot of that churn went away just because we were able to get things into units, atomic units, and we were able to move things in mass as a single atomic unit. That basic value add was a godsend to us. They had no real controls prior to that. They had no real understanding of the usage of source control into the project. When I arrived at the law firm the first time, they had been working on a project for 8 months. They had been doing it in a sandbox, and they had no clue what was there that needed to be moved from that development sandbox into the test environments, because the people had moved on. They could not use source control to actually manage this and answer this question in the absence of the people that actually originally created it, or the contractors that have been moved on or whatever. So there was a lot of different little things, a lot of different things. When I say them, it's like, duh, these are all these, you should be doing this to begin with, but it's the reality of Salesforce. And so, does that answer your question? Yeah. Other questions, thoughts? Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Okay. I like the question marks myself.
The people going through this, because I see a lot of onus on the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Where is Salesforce?
All right. This is my answer. This is not my esteemed colleagues in the room answer. This is the way I view this. This is, the maturity of this is around 1.5 years. It's been around for 3 years. The maturity of this, where it's acceptable, has been about 1.5 years. When you take Salesforce's consulting team, they consult to clients just like I would consult to clients. So from that perspective, they're my peers. What I think is a bit unfair is Salesforce, the product team, has moved us into a new realm. It's going to take time for the consulting team to understand and learn a thing. For example, there have been some tech evangelists, specifically Zane Turner. I give her all kinds of crap. Zane Turner is a wonderful tech evangelist. She always talks to the developer community, telling about the new things coming on. 2 years ago, year and a half, 18, 20 months, somewhere in that range, there was a prescriptive piece of advice when it came to packaging, and that said, whatever you do, bring all your data objects into a foundational package that has all your data objects. And I was looking at it, and I immediately saw all the different circular dependencies. They didn't argue. They're very smart people, but they're just inexperienced with this new way. And we don't hear that advice whatsoever, because people have learned through time. I had an unfair advantage on my Salesforce developers, because I've been in the technology sector for 25 plus years now. I lived and breathed all of these enterprise architecture stuff all the way through the worlds of Java and .NET and enterprise architecture. When I came to Salesforce, I was actually looking for various corollaries in the world of Salesforce and didn't see them 10 years ago when I got into Salesforce. I started to see them when DX started kind of impacting. My point being, Salesforce consulting is learning quickly, but just like I did, I had to go through projects and find out what does work and what doesn't work. Am I correct, Chris, that the advice that you're getting from Salesforce has improved over the past year? And I'm not sliding there, but I'm just. Very similar. Yeah. Small customers won't run into nearly these kinds of complexities.
They are going to, there is something that's getting worked on for smaller dogs.
Mhm.
There is something that is coming up that's going to be interesting.
Yep. No, they can't.
That might address, but again, for the large enterprises that are actually benefit. Unfortunately, you might have to go through this in order for you to reap the benefits that you're mentioning.
Yes.
Because again, sort of it's a single log and it's all with all the apps. I don't think that pain is going to go away.
Yeah.
But for the smaller logs, potentially there is a
Yeah. If you look at other technologies and the history along those lines, there have been great books written about architectural design, the design patterns by the Gang of Four. Again, Martin Fowler's Patterns of Enterprise Architecture, domain-driven design. These are wonderful, excellent resources. How many of them were written by Sun Microsystems, Microsoft, Oracle, or any of the other vendors? The answer is none. My point being is the community will realize what is working, what is not working. And by just the evolution of the thought process and repetitive nature, there will be best practices that emerge for this. So give my counterparts at Salesforce a little break. They're learning just as fast as I am in some respects.
There's a lot of that stuff crafted and into their product development to define better ways.
Exactly.
Continually revisit.
Mhm.
I think one of the other things that's relevant too is that moving to DX and unlock packages doesn't necessarily mean you have to move to the Salesforce DX command line. There's a lot of third-party tools can also help with some of the stuff in that territory. So I think that's one of their other considerations. They can have special purpose code.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole group of Salesforce developers that have never seen the command line, never saw Eclipse, and Lord knows they don't know what to do with the command line at all. And so the CLI doesn't, there have been a couple of different things that the Salesforce tried. Salesforce had an initiative that they ended up abandoning a little bit in the early days, but there have been other things that have come out, like he was talking about. What is it, Capato, and then GearSet, and some of the other major vendors out there are trying to remove at least the CLI section of this component. It still doesn't address certain questions like what should I put in one package versus another, but it helps along that front. And so, but with everything, the tools will mature. JavaScript is the leading language right now. And I laugh when people say, so it's brand new, it's brand new. And I'm like, no, JavaScript is only 6 months younger than Java. It literally came out 6 months afterwards, but it's matured over the past 20 years. It's been out there for 20 years. What will DX look like in 2 years from now? We're going to find out. Yeah, so, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Again, a lot of this is, let's put the disclaimer. A lot of this is John Daniel's thoughts. And but it is what it is. My thoughts. You saw how 2 years ago when I did the packaging question, and I was gung-ho about it, and it's been a long journey in the past 2 years, but we're getting there. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Don't put the profiles into the package. Profiles are going to be separate. Permission sets, probably where you need to be going to. Put the permission sets into the package. Don't put profiles. The profile will live in the happy soup, and that's fine. Not everything won't go into packages. That's okay. Yeah, and there's other things that they're going to do with permission sets and down the road. And so anyway, but yeah.
So we were planning to build the permission set up. Would you recommend going this route? We didn't prefer it, but you're going with DX now, or you want to?
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to get to a point that if you don't go to DX, you're going to have problems hiring new developers. Let's just think about that. So, I mean, yes, DX is the way to go for any kind of development, period, in a sentence. And unfortunately, for those of us who started life over here, we've got to get to over there. And that's just the issue. But that's okay, we'll get there. Alrighty, folks, with that, I think the next slide is, so this was the survey that we did last time about all the different things that we were looking for, and transitioning to DX was the topic that we talked about tonight. So next time, we're going to get into a deeper dive around the frameworks that we've seen good mileage out of, the Apex Mocks, Apex Common, Force DI, AT4DX, separation of concerns, that paradigm. So we're going to go deep dive into that area on the next one. So, and the next slide, please. And again, huge thanks to Mr. Permjit. Thank you very much for the pizza. Appreciate that. And look for upcoming events. We're going to get some new ones out, but stay in touch with us. Actually, the next page, there you go. So if you're not part of the Trailblazer group, please come out on the Trailblazer community and find the Richmond VA Salesforce Trailblazer group. It's for both admins and developers. And then, of course, this is the Trailblazer community group, which gets you into the night. And then, of course, there's Twitter, the RVA, SFDoug. So with that, thank you very much. And
Trailblazer community links to the admin page, and
that's right.
Event just went out live today, which is we're doing a Salesforce Labs in a Box. So there's going to be conversations about different customizable apps that are available in the App Exchange. Tons of swag giveaway. I just saw you got this directly from Salesforce, so it's like really cool swag. So
it's gonna be good.
Like swag.
It's gonna be good.
Definitely come. It's on October 23rd at the 1717 Innovation Center.
So, there you go. And I think that's it. Thank you very much for coming out. Turn off the recording.
Are you going to be sharing the recording?